My friends, let us begin with a truth so simple, so close, that the mind has overlooked it for lifetimes. Every one of us seeks peace. Every one of us longs for freedom from fear, from anxiety, from the endless cycle of thought that tries so desperately to manage life. And yet, the very seeking itself hides the answer, because the peace we chase is not out in the world, not in the future, not in the changed circumstance. It is here. It is now. It is the very presence of God already within your own being. For centuries, humanity has believed that peace is attained by improving the mind, by strengthening the intellect, by gathering knowledge, or by pushing away the conditions that disturb us. But none of these efforts bring lasting harmony, because all of them begin with the assumption that we, as separate individuals, must reach out for God, must labor for peace, must earn spiritual grace. And this assumption itself is the very barrier to realization. In the great silence behind thought, in that still point within you where no fear can enter, the presence is already functioning. It is not something you must achieve. It is something you must recognize. And when I speak of silence, I do not mean the absence of sound. I mean the inner hush where we stop leaning on the mind, where we cease drawing conclusions from appearances, where we rest, if only for a moment, in the awareness that all that God is embodied within you as your own consciousness. You see, the great secret of spiritual life is not in effort, but in realization. It is not in trying to bring God to you, but in perceiving that God has never been absent. From this recognition, something remarkable begins to occur. The confusion of the mind subsides. The nervous system quiets. The racing inner world slows, because it has encountered a dimension of being that precedes thought, precedes fear, precedes all images of lack or limitation. Today, we will explore why this silent recognition, what I have called the practice of the presence, has such profound power. Not only in the spiritual sense, but also in the very structure of the mind, the brain, and the patterns that govern your daily experience. This is not theory. This is not philosophy. It is the living truth that consciousness, when recognized as the one presence, begins to reorder your entire inner world. And as your inner world is reordered, your outer experience follows naturally, without force, without strain, without the anxious manipulations of the personal mind. So as we begin this journey, I ask only one thing of you. Listen with the stillness beneath your thoughts. Do not try to believe. Do not attempt to understand intellectually. Simply allow these words to point you toward what is already present within you. For the peace you have sought through effort is found only in the recognition of what has always been your reality. My friends, let us look more deeply at this presence that is already within you. For what we are speaking of is not a new discovery. It is not a modern invention, nor a personal interpretation. It is the very heart of every genuine mystical teaching throughout the ages. Long before you or I walked the earth, long before the rise of religions, doctrines, and philosophies, there were men and women who touched this inner realm and discovered that the source of all life was not outside of them, but within their own consciousness. When the prophets spoke of the still small voice, they were describing this same inner contact. When the psalmist wrote, "Be still and know that I am God," he was not advising belief, effort, or ritual. He was pointing to the silence in which this presence reveals itself. And when the Master said, "The kingdom of God is within you," he was not speaking poetically. He was revealing a spiritual fact that the divine reality is not something to travel toward, not something to accumulate, but something already established in the depth of your being. All through history, the great mystics spoke with one voice, though they used different words. They declared that the true self is not the human mind, not the personality, not the temporary body, but the living presence of God expressing itself through individual consciousness. They knew that separation is the great illusion, that fear arises only from believing we stand apart from the source, and that liberation comes the moment this false sense dissolves. Now, you may ask, if this truth has been known for so long, why do so few experience it? The answer is simple. Humanity has confused the teachings with the teacher, the words with the experience, the form with the reality. We have worshipped the outer symbols while missing the inner revelation. The early disciples did not transform because they heard words. They transformed because they felt the presence that those words pointed to. The mystics did not awaken through study. They awakened through inner recognition, and so the truth became buried beneath centuries of tradition, ritual, and intellectual interpretation. Yet the presence never left. It has remained where it always was, within your own consciousness, waiting for recognition. In our time, we have the extraordinary opportunity to return to this original experiential understanding, not through abandoning religion, not through embracing philosophy, but through the same inner realization that awakened the saints and sages, the awareness that God is not a distant power to be reached, but the living foundation of your own existence. This is the thread that unites every awakened soul across time, and it is this same thread that we follow today. For the ancient truth is eternally present. You and the Father are one, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but in spiritual fact. And when this truth begins to dawn even faintly, everything you have sought in the outer world begins to shift. For you are touching the reality that all mystics have known. The presence within is the only life, the only power, the only truth, and this realization is the beginning of freedom. My friends, before we can understand the profound effect that silence and inner recognition have upon us, we must see clearly why the mind suffers. For unless we understand the nature of the problem, we will continue to look for solutions where none exist. We will keep trying to repair the mind with the mind, and that is the very cycle that perpetuates fear, anxiety, and confusion. Let us examine what the mind is doing when it suffers. The mind is not evil, nor is it broken. It is simply functioning from a false premise. The belief that you are a separate being, standing apart from your source, responsible for your own safety, your own supply, your own guidance. The moment this belief enters consciousness, fear is born. And once fear is born, the mind begins to defend itself against imagined threats, to anticipate dangers that have not occurred, to rehearse outcomes that may never come to pass. This is what gives rise to worry. This is what creates the vortex of overthinking. The mind tries to secure a future that cannot be secured, to control conditions it cannot control, to solve problems that have no real existence except in imagination. And so the mind becomes trapped in the very activity designed to protect itself. Now, modern science has discovered something that the mystics understood intuitively. The mind that lives in fear creates physical pathways, neural circuits that reinforce more fear. Every anxious thought strengthens the anxiety. Every defensive reaction trains the brain to react again. The more we worry, the more we condition ourselves to worry. But let us be very clear. This conditioning is not a cause. It is only an effect. The cause is the belief in separation. The moment we believe ourselves to be little minds facing a large world, we activate mechanisms of survival. The nervous system tightens. The breath becomes shallow. The heart quickens. The body contracts. And the mind begins its restless motion, searching for solutions outside itself. That is why so many people feel exhausted even when nothing is happening. Their bodies are responding to the pictures created by fear, not to truth. And yet, this entire drama rests upon a single misunderstanding: the belief that you are a personal, vulnerable self who must fight for peace and struggle for security. But the spiritual reality is otherwise. You are not a separate mind. You are the individualized expression of one infinite consciousness. That consciousness is your safety, your supply, your wisdom, and your guidance. It is the very presence that lives you. When this truth is unrecognized, the mind must take over. When this truth begins to dawn, the mind can rest. You see, the mind suffers because it is trying to function alone. It is trying to solve life through thought. It is trying to achieve peace through control. And it cannot. It was never intended to. The mind is only an instrument, useful, necessary, but not the source of your life, nor the teacher of your truth. This suffering continues until something within you says, there must be another way, and that is the beginning of awakening. It is the moment when the personal mind loosens its grip and the deeper self begins to whisper. It is the moment when you begin to sense that perhaps peace does not come from effort, but from recognition. Perhaps guidance does not come from thinking, but from stillness. Perhaps your life is not something you manage, but something lived through you by a presence greater than thought. And so we stand at the threshold of transformation, understanding the mechanics of fear and seeing that the antidote is not in more thinking, but in turning toward the presence that exists before thinking. This is where true healing begins. My friends, now that we have seen why the mind suffers, let us look at what occurs when we enter the silence, when we engage in what I have called the practice of the presence. For although the essence of this work is spiritual, its effects touch the entire being, even the structure of the brain that modern science studies so carefully. When we become still, not forcing the mind, not struggling with thoughts, but simply resting in quiet recognition, something remarkable begins to take place. The mental activity that we have identified as me begins to soften. The restless movement of thought slows. The nervous system, which has been habitually tightening in response to imagined danger, receives a signal it has long forgotten. There is nothing to defend, there is nothing to fear, there is nothing missing. In this silence, the brain shifts from survival mode into receptivity. The parts of the mind associated with vigilance, with worry, with rumination, the personal sense of self, begin to diminish in activity. And those areas associated with openness, compassion, intuitive insight, and inner clarity begin to awaken. Scientists call these functional networks, but the mystic understands them as what occurs when the mind yields to the presence. This is why I have always said, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Not because an external God enters the brain, but because when consciousness recognizes its own source, the mind relaxes into its natural order. The brain follows consciousness. It does not lead it. You see, when you attempt to quiet the mind through effort, the mind grows noisier. When you attempt to control thought, thought resists. But when you simply recognize that the presence is already here, that you are not striving to reach God, but resting in God, the entire system begins to reorganize itself around this truth. The mind calms because it has encountered something greater than its own activity. The body eases because it has touched a peace not dependent on circumstances. The emotions soften because they are no longer fed by fear. Now, science observes these shifts and describes them in terms of brain waves, neuroplasticity, and neural integration, and yet these are only the shadows of a far deeper reality. The mystics of every age experienced these transformations long before the instruments of science existed. They knew that when one turns within, when one abides in the quiet awareness of the presence, healing takes place, clarity arises, and harmony begins to express itself without effort. The point to remember is this: you are not trying to manipulate your brain. You are not practicing a technique to change brain chemistry. You are recognizing the presence that exists before brain, before mind, before thought. And when that recognition occurs, the brain simply adjusts to the consciousness that governs it. It becomes a clear instrument instead of a frightened master. The emotions soften because they are no longer fed by fear. You see, when you attempt to quiet the mind through effort, the mind grows noisier. When you attempt to control thought, thought resists. But when you simply recognize that the presence is already here, that you are not striving to reach God, but resting in God, the entire system begins to reorganize itself around this truth. The mind calms because it has encountered something greater than its own activity. The body eases because it has touched a peace not dependent on circumstances. This is the beginning of transformation, not through force, not through willpower, but through recognition of what already is. My friends, let us come now to the heart of the work, the simple, direct way in which we enter the awareness of the presence. For all that we have spoken of so far would be mere philosophy if it could not be lived. But the infinite way has never been a philosophy. It is a practice, a living relationship with the presence that is your own being. And yet, this practice is unlike anything the personal mind attempts. It is not a discipline of thought. It is not a repetition of words. It is not an effort to achieve a mystical state. It is the most natural activity in the world because it is simply the recognition of what already is. Let us begin gently. First, you become still, not by forcing the mind into silence, but by ceasing to lean on it. Do not fight thoughts. Do not chase them away. Simply allow them to be, as you would allow clouds to drift across the sky, knowing that they do not touch the sky itself. You are not concerned whether the mind is noisy or quiet. You are simply resting in the awareness that behind every thought, behind every sensation, behind every emotion, there is a deeper presence that has never moved. As this quiet awareness begins to open, gently acknowledge the presence is here. You do not say it as an affirmation. You do not attempt to believe it. You simply recognize a truth that is present whether you acknowledge it or not. For the presence does not come when you remember it, nor depart when you forget. It is the foundation of your being. Now, let the recognition deepen. This presence is the life I am, not the life I hope to acquire, not a power I summon, but the very essence of my existence. The thoughts that come and go are not my life. The body that changes is not my life. The emotions that rise and fall are not my life. The presence is my life. And as you rest in this recognition, something subtle begins. The mind may still produce thoughts, but they no longer command your attention. The body may still send signals, but they no longer define your identity. The emotions may still stir, but they pass through without anchoring themselves in you. You are aware of a dimension of being that is untouched by these movements, a stillness that holds them all. This is the beginning of contact. Do not try to prolong it. Do not try to deepen it. Do not try to feel anything special. Simply remain receptive, as if listening for a presence that speaks without words. This listening attitude is the essence of the practice. It is the quiet surrender of the personal sense of self and the opening to the infinite self that has always been here. In this stillness, a gentle realization may arise. I live yet not I. The presence lives itself as me. You may not say these words, but you will feel their meaning. You will sense that your life is not something you manage. It is something unfolding through you. And if you remain in this listening, even for a few moments, the presence will begin to reveal itself not as an experience, not as an emotion, but as a quiet certainty, a silent knowing that you are held, supported, and lived by something greater than the mind can conceive. This is the practice of the presence. Not effort, not technique, not repetition, recognition. Take this into your day. Before you speak, pause for one moment. Before you react, turn inward for one breath. Before you attempt to solve, acknowledge the presence that precedes the problem. These micro-recognitions become a continuous practice, a rhythm of returning, a gentle remembering that anchors your entire life in the awareness of God within. This, my friends, is the path not to bring God into your experience, but to recognize God as your experience. My friends, now that we have touched the essence of the practice of the presence, let us explore why this simple inner recognition has such profound effects on the outer circumstances of life. For many have asked, how can a few moments of silence possibly heal the body, restore harmony in relationships, or bring supply where lack appears to be? And the answer is astonishing in its simplicity, because problems are not what they seem to be. A problem, as the human mind understands it, is always an external condition demanding action, demanding correction, demanding control. But to the awakened consciousness, a problem is nothing more than an appearance formed by the mind when it believes itself separate from its source. The problem is not the condition. The problem is the belief behind the condition. When you live as though you are a personal self facing a conflicted world, every circumstance appears as something to defend against or overcome, and the more you resist, the stronger the appearance becomes. The mind fights with shadows and believes them real. The more it struggles, the more entangled it becomes. But the moment you enter the silence, the moment you recognize the presence that stands behind all appearance, the entire picture begins to change. You are no longer engaging the world from the level of the problem. You are engaging life from the level of truth. And from that level, the problem loses its authority, because it has no reality in the presence. Understand this clearly. You do not dissolve problems. Problems dissolve in the light of realized truth. A problem, as the human mind understands it, is always an external condition demanding action, demanding correction, demanding control. But to the awakened consciousness, a problem is nothing more than an appearance formed by the mind when it believes itself separate from its source. The problem is not the condition. The problem is the belief behind the condition. Let us look at this more deeply. When you recognize the presence even for a moment, the mind's frantic activity slows, the nervous system relaxes, the emotional currents settle. In that stillness, you are no longer projecting fear onto the situation. You are no longer feeding the appearance with your concern. You have withdrawn the only power it ever had, your belief in it. And because consciousness is cause and circumstance is effect, the moment consciousness shifts, the outer must follow. Not always instantly, not always dramatically, but inevitably. Solutions rise without the strain of planning. Resources appear without the anxiety of searching. Healing unfolds without the force of will. Harmony emerges without manipulation. This is why Joel Goldsmith taught that we do not treat the condition. We treat the consciousness that perceives the condition. When consciousness is aligned with truth, the body responds, the environment responds. The so-called external world realigns itself to reflect the inner freedom that has been recognized. But notice the essential point. You do not do any of this. You do not try to change conditions. You do not try to fix outcomes. You do not even try to feel spiritual. You simply rest in the presence. The presence does the work. This is the secret behind all spiritual healing, not human thought, not mental effort, not positive affirmation, but the realization of the one presence as the only power. When this realization dawns, even faintly, the appearance collapses because it never had substance of its own. It was only a picture painted by a mind that had forgotten its source. And so the great truth is revealed. Problems dissolve not because you conquer them, but because you stop granting them reality. You stand in the light of the presence, and the illusion fades. This is why the practice of the presence transforms lives, not through struggle, but through surrender, not through effort, but through recognition, not by bringing God to the condition, but by seeing that God is the reality behind the condition. And so, when you are faced with fear, pause. When confronted with lack, turn within. When disturbed by conflict, rest in the present. You will find that the situation which once seemed so heavy, so threatening, so urgent, begins to lose its power. You will feel a spaciousness around it. And from this spaciousness, the right action, the right words, the right unfoldment will reveal themselves quietly and naturally. But notice the essential point. You do not do any of this. You do not try to change conditions. You do not try to fix outcomes. You do not even try to feel spiritual. You simply rest in the presence. The presence does the work. Many believe that spiritual practice must be long, intense, or dramatic. They imagine that hours must be set aside, rituals observed, or states of consciousness achieved. But the infinite way is not a path of strain. It is a path of remembering. And remembering can happen in the smallest moments, moments so brief the mind scarcely notices, yet so powerful that they shift the direction of an entire life. Begin simply as you rise in the morning. Before you reach for the world, pause. Just one breath, one inward turning, one gentle recognition. The presence is here. Not to be summoned, not to be invited, but already here. That single moment sets the tone of the entire day because it establishes the truth that consciousness, not circumstance, will guide you. As you move through your morning, brushing your teeth, preparing a meal, walking to your work, let there be tiny intervals of recognition, not long meditations, but the briefest awareness that beneath all activity, beneath all motion, there is a stillness that never moves. You are not trying to feel holy. You are simply noticing what is already so. And as you interact with the people in your life, family, colleagues, strangers, remember that each one is an expression of the same presence you have touched within yourself. Their behavior may vary. Their personality may be pleasant or difficult, but behind the appearance stands the same infinite reality. When you recognize this not as an idea, but as a quiet inner knowing, your reactions soften, your judgments dissolve, and a new kind of communication begins to unfold. This is practicing the presence in relationship. When challenges arise, and they will do not rush to fix them, do not let the mind leap into old patterns of concern. Instead, allow yourself one brief pause, a single moment to acknowledge the presence is here also. This pause is the opening through which grace enters. It breaks the momentum of fear and reestablishes the truth that the problem has no power outside your belief in it. You see, practicing the presence is not about withdrawing from the world. It is about seeing through the world. seeing the invisible source behind every visible form. When you cook, cook in awareness. When you speak, speak in awareness. When you walk, walk in awareness. Not awareness of the outer world alone, but awareness of the inner presence that animates all things. What begins as momentary recognition becomes, over time, a continuous background hum, a subtle sense of companionship, of being upheld, guided, sustained. You find yourself no longer living from the mind, but from the presence. Decisions arise naturally, without the strain of weighing possibilities. Actions flow more effortlessly. Conversations take on a clarity and compassion that surprise even you. And gradually, without your effort, the presence becomes the atmosphere of your life. You discover that you are never alone, not because a distant God watches over you, but because the very life that breathes you is the presence itself. This is the unbroken awareness, not something you achieve, but something you return to again and again until it becomes the most natural experience in the world, like remembering the rhythm of your own breath. And so, my friends, begin with these small recognitions. A moment in the morning, a breath before a decision, a silent acknowledgement in the presence of another. These are the threads that weave the presence into the pattern of your day until your entire life becomes a lived awareness of truth. My friends, as the awareness of the presence begins to anchor itself in your daily life, something subtle yet extraordinary takes place. You begin to live not from the patterns of the past, not from the conditioning of the personal mind, but from the quiet wisdom of consciousness itself. Transformation does not come as a dramatic event. It comes as a shift so gentle, so natural, that at first you may hardly notice it, and yet everything begins to change. The first sign of this transformation is the softening of reaction. Where once you would have been disturbed, now you find yourself pausing, resting, listening, not because you force yourself to be spiritual, but because the presence within you has become more real than the appearance before you. You meet conflict with clarity instead of defensiveness, uncertainty with trust instead of fear, and challenge with openness instead of resistance. The world itself has not changed, you have changed. And as your reactions soften, your perceptions begin to shift. You no longer see people merely as personalities shaped by habit and history. You sense the deeper identity behind their behavior, the same identity that lives in you. Words spoken in anger no longer penetrate so deeply. Situations that once invoked fear no longer have the same authority. Why? Because you are beginning to live from the awareness that only the presence is power. Then, almost imperceptibly, another transformation unfolds. Decisions that once involved intense deliberation begin to arise naturally from within. You no longer struggle to choose the right path. The path reveals itself. You discover that intuition is not the privilege of a few enlightened souls, but the natural language of consciousness. When fear is absent, guidance becomes a quiet knowing, sometimes subtle, sometimes unmistakable, but always gentle. This transformation also touches the body. As the mind releases its chronic tension, its habitual clinging to control the body begins to respond. Its rhythms become more balanced, its functions more harmonious. Healing unfolds not through effort, but through the removal of the fear that once disrupted natural order. The body reflects the peace that consciousness has recognized. The same is true in the realm of supply. When you no longer live from the belief that you must secure your good through human effort alone, doors open that you never imagined. Opportunities appear not through strain, but through alignment. The right people, the right circumstances, the right resources come into your experience not because you manifested them, but because the presence is expressing its own wholeness through the channel of your life. But perhaps the most profound transformation is this: you discover that you are no longer living your life through the personal sense of self. You are being lived. You feel a quiet companionship with something greater than the mind, something that guides, supports, protects, and unfolds your way without needing to be asked. You find yourself trusting life because you have touched the one who lives it. And as you abide in this trust, fear begins to lose its foundation. Anxiety no longer grips you as it once did. The future no longer looms as a threat, because you sense that the presence which operates now will also operate then. Even memory changes. The past loses its emotional weight because you see that it had no power except the meaning the mind gave it. This is what it means to live from consciousness instead of conditioning. It is not a new personality. It is not a refined ego. It is the dawning realization that the self you have always believed yourself to be has never truly lived. The presence has lived as you from the beginning. The difference now is that you know it. This knowing is freedom. This knowing is peace. This knowing is the Christ consciousness awakening in you, not as a mystical achievement, but as your natural state. When you live from this recognition, life becomes less of a struggle and more of an unfoldment. Problems cease to define your reality. Circumstances cease to intimidate you. Even in moments of challenge, you feel an undercurrent of certainty that does not come from the mind. It comes from the presence that has revealed itself as your own being. This is the transformation that Joel Goldsmith spoke of. A transformation not of the outer life, though outer changes certainly follow, but a transformation of identity, a shift from the conditioned self to the conscious self, from living by fear to living by grace, from effort to effortless being. This, my friends, is what awaits those who practice even a few moments of recognition each day. This is the fruit of living from the presence rather than from the mind. My friends, as we bring this time together to its natural conclusion, let us return once more to the simple truth that has been the thread of this entire journey. The presence you seek is already here. It has never required your effort, your struggle, or your striving. It requires only your recognition. Throughout this teaching, we have traced the movement from fear to peace, from mental activity to inner quiet, from the conditioned sense of self to the realization of the infinite self that is the very essence of your being. And now, as you sit here, you may already feel a gentle shift, a softening, a calming, a deeper awareness that you are not alone, because you are not separate. The presence has been the silent listener behind every word spoken. It has been the stillness beneath your thoughts. It has been the awareness that has quietly observed the mind, the emotions, the sensations, and known them to be temporary movements on the surface of a far greater depth. That depth is you, the real you, the eternal you, the you that has never been touched by fear, limitation, or time. Do not imagine that this journey ends when the words stop. Words can carry us only to the threshold. Beyond that, the silence takes over, the same silence that existed before this talk began, the same silence that will remain after it ends, the same silence that holds the entire universe in its invisible embrace. This silence is your home. It is your foundation. It is your true identity. It is the presence that lives you. So as you go forward into the activities of your day, carry with you the simple practices we have touched. One breath of recognition in the morning, one pause before reacting, one moment of listening before speaking, one gentle acknowledgement. The presence is here. These small openings allow the infinite to flow into the finite. They allow grace to operate where effort once struggled. They allow healing to unfold where fear once contracted. They allow wisdom to speak where the mind once shouted. They allow the life that is God to express itself freely as your life. And remember this, you are not practicing to reach a distant God. You are practicing to remember the God that is your own being. There is nothing to achieve. There is only something to realize. And that realization may come in the simplest moment, in the quiet of a breath, in the pause between thoughts. Before we part, let us rest together, if only briefly, in the awareness that needs no words. Simply be present. Simply be aware. Simply be. The presence is here. The presence has always been here. And the presence will live as you in every moment that follows. Go in peace, my friends. Not the peace the world gives, but the peace that arises from knowing who and what you are in truth.